8 months it took me to finish this little baby. Hello everyone, as you are watching this, it is most likely Boxing Day, so 26th of December. I hope you had a great Christmas and I hope you continuing to enjoy the holidays. I finished reading this giant book on 21st of December. I have had a few days to reflect on it and I've got quite a few things to say about it, some good, but also some not so good. And I saved all of that to the end. So first you'll see my vlog when I was documenting my experience of reading War and Peace. Then I've got a bit of a summary. This is my own personal review of the book. And then right at the end, I also included a chapter on tips and various advice that I want to share with you in case you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed about picking up this huge classic. And of course, feel free to skip everything and go right to the end to discover what these tips are. Today is Saturday, a couple of days before my birthday, and as a birthday gift I was given by my family a whole day just to myself, which I decided to spend in our garden shed because that gives me privacy and peace and quiet. And they promised to leave me alone so that I could do whatever I wanted. And I thought, fantastic! This is the day when I'm going to start reading War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that this classic was on my list of top 5 priority classics to read in 2025, and I did attempt to start it once when I had to take my husband for a procedure to a hospital and I was expecting a very long wait, so I took the book with me and I thought, perfect, I'm going to have at least a couple of hours for myself in the waiting room and I'll spend it reading War and Peace. And unfortunately that didn't work very well because I couldn't really concentrate, to be honest. There were a lot of distractions, people walking by, and also actually my husband's procedure took merely 45 minutes, so I dropped it at that point. And this is my attempt number 2, and so far it's going well. I am on page 14 and I'll continue to read and I'll continue to keep updating you as I go along. Today is the 5th of August and I'm only so far on page 252. The sheer volume feels a bit intimidating, doesn't it? Because when you pick up a book of this size with 1,300 pages, it feels like you'll never finish it. And the second problem I had was because of the sheer volume of characters that were introduced in the beginning of this book. Again, felt a bit overwhelming. However, I have found a solution to it and I would love to share it with you so that you can speed up your process if you decide to read War and Peace. First of all, this sense of humor in here I absolutely adore. This is not the type of sense of humor that is maybe 100% obvious. It's just subtle and it is the language that Tolstoy is using. For example, there is a scene in which we have 2 lady friends and one has to pass on some difficult information about a family member that has just come to light to this other woman who is this family member's mother. And so they go into a room, they close the door, and this is what happens afterwards. Anna Mikhailovna opened the door. Her face wore the proud expression of a surgeon who has just performed a difficult operation and admits the public to appreciate his skill. And then sometimes you have these observations that feel accurate and serious. So, for example, when starting on a journey or changing their mode of life, men capable of reflection or generally in a serious frame of mind. Now that I'm on page 252, I do need to say that this is getting super interesting. The chapters are short, so it is actually very easy to read, and you get to start to be really interested in all the little intrigues that are happening. Bad news is that I have already filmed this video. I filmed quick update yesterday, but then when I transferred it onto the computer, it turned out that the audio didn't work. So I'm doing the video again. Good news is that since then I've actually read more of War and Peace, so I have a couple more thoughts to add to what I was going to say yesterday. Anyway, it is the 2nd of September and I thought it's time to do a bit of a check-in because now I am 1/3 into the book and I need to say that I am more and more drawn into the lives of these characters. And if you've been on this channel, you know that I always read several books concurrently because I like to rotate and I like to have few things on the go. And for example, before going to bed, I will read usually something a bit lighter. Classics I tend to read during the daytime because they just require usually a bit more effort. But the fact that I keep reaching for this one more and more is just a testament to Tolstoy's writing and how engaging this book is. I need to say that it really actually doesn't take much effort to read this book. As you keep going, maybe the beginning is a bit difficult to start with, but as you keep going, it's just pure pleasure. The world that is being built here is so vivid, and you know, now that everything's picked up pace, you've got characters dying, characters getting married, and so on. This is a really, really interesting read. The only thing I'm missing a little bit is in the beginning of the book, I saw glimpses of Tolstoy's sense of humor, which I absolutely loved. It's very subtle, especially it comes through when he describes characters. But I have not seen it in the last few chapters. So I am hoping this will pop up again. The other thing that may help you is that if, like me, you are slightly worried that you will be put off by all the descriptions of the battles and the war, because maybe, like me, you are just not into, you know, the military operations and military strategy, fear not. The way Tolstoy does it is just so civilian reader friendly. Now, I still have 2/3 to go, so quite a lot. We're talking about 1,000 pages still left. So I am still hoping to finish this by the end of 2025, but if I don't, I don't. It's not like I need it for my degree or anything like that. It's the 8th of October today, and I am on page 779. Tolstoy has this special way of drawing you in and making you feel like you invested in all these characters, I guess because of all the detail that he puts into describing the situations and the characters as well. And I guess this is why this book is so long, because you have moments, for example, where certain ladies are getting ready for a party and he describes this preparation with such detail. It feels like you're there. Another thing I really appreciate in Tolstoy's writing is how objective he is when he writes about the Russian history. I'm obviously already into the section where Russia enters into the Second War with Napoleon. And the way Tolstoy here, without any spoilers, describes how this all happened and what caused it, and how he explains a tendency to, after the fact, look for some deep strategy and reasoning behind certain decisions and decision-making process that is happening at the highest ranks. It just feels so astute and accurate, and probably applies still to this day to a lot of conflicts that are taking place in the world now. And it's just really sad, isn't it, that, this book was written almost 2 centuries ago, and we as human beings haven't really learned much. I finished it. I finished this novel a couple of days ago, and to be honest, I was going to film another segment documenting reading the last 100 pages or so, but my pace of reading, for whatever reason, really picked up towards the end of the book. I don't know whether I was just eager to see it through, or whether I was expecting and I was excited about some kind of huge closure to this epic novel. Anyway, I was reading it quite fast and I just didn't have time to stop and film. So instead, you are getting my thoughts today. Let me put this away because this is quite heavy. Instead, I'm just going to hold my tea. So I'm going to try to put in words my impressions of this novel and how I feel about it. And while I think this book is definitely worth reading because of what Tolstoy attempted here, this ambitious undertaking of covering such a wide scope of characters, events, timeline, locations. My favorite thing about Tolstoy's writing is actually the way he writes characters. They feel extremely real, and I know that they feel real because I very passionately disliked one of the characters, and even the characters that I did like, they weren't perfect. They were very much flawed. If we take Natasha, for example, she's very much this young spoiled girl, and we watch her going through different life events and changing, although I am not 100% convinced that I like what Tolstoy did with her storyline towards the end, but this is his story. Anyway, he allowed Natasha to be this very much messy and often inconsistent character, which I like in a novel because I want my characters in the books that I'm reading not to be perfect, and they can't be black and white because in real life no one is black and white, and we human beings are quite complex creatures. I think this is my favorite thing about War and Peace, and for this reason I am very much looking forward to picking up Anna Karenina, because I think in Anna Karenina, as Tolstoy is allowing himself to focus on a much smaller group of people, he will dive even deeper into their psyche. So I'm expecting even more intense investment into the characters, my emotional investment into the characters, because even though the characters in War and Peace felt very close to me, obviously I have been living with them for months and months and months, I think because of the number of characters, none of them felt like I was 100% invested in them, if that makes sense. And I think this is what Anna Karenina will do a little bit better for me personally. But of course, if you're attempting an epic novel like War and Peace, which is such a huge scope, and if you cover such wide range of characters, obviously there will be restrictions around that. So I completely understand. I also love the fact that War and Peace was written with such an accessible language. Thank you, Tolstoy, for not making the language too complicated. So overall, I would say that I highly recommend this novel, and it is definitely worth reading. I do have few niggly comments about it, which, feels a bit unfair to share them with you because it's a tried and tested classic. Obviously, a lot of effort has been put into it, and because of its scope, it's never going to be a perfect novel. But you're watching this channel for book reviews, so let me try it explain the things that I didn't quite like about War and Peace. First one of them is that Tolstoy actually lost me a little bit towards the end with his long musings, which felt more like an essay more than a novel on war and how we human beings write history and how we approach it. I completely understand what he was trying to do here, and I am aware his approach was quite new because he disagreed with this whole notion that history is shaped by a handful of a few great men. For me, this went on for too long. Again, maybe because for me the most interesting part were the characters, and I wanted to hear more about them. Also, the humor that I saw in the beginning of the novel does not really reappear throughout the novel. And I think it's a lost opportunity because I think Tolstoy does have a great, probably sarcastic sense of humor. And I would love to see more of it. But that was nowhere to be seen. This is a very, very serious novel with the writer taking himself very, very seriously as well. And another small issue that I haven't heard anyone talking about is the way war itself is described. For me, it felt somewhat smoothed out and not as brutally portrayed as I was expecting it to be. And that may be just me, because I grew up with a generation who lived through the war, who experienced German and Russian army invasion into their country and into their homes. And I know from their direct experience how brutally civilians were treated. So I always imagined the reality of war, something extremely horrific. And in War and Peace, yes, you have battlefields and people are dying, but it wasn't as gory as I was expecting it to be. And interestingly enough, one of the most graphic and disturbing scenes in the whole novel for me wasn't battle at all, but the hunting scene. And actually, this is a good opportunity to give you a trigger warning for those of you who struggle with reading about animal cruelty, because that hunting scene is extremely cruel, and I was shocked how affected I was by that. There is a wild animal involved who isn't killed, but he is dragged back to the home in a way that felt very cruel. So if you're sensitive about that sort of thing, maybe as soon as you start reading that Natasha and her brother, or I think even both of the brothers, are invited to a hunting scene, maybe skip those pages. However, what was really well done, I thought, by Tolstoy was the confusion about the war, and especially between the soldiers on the battlefield, how little actually they knew and they understood and were communicated about the movements and about what's happening, and also this whole Tolstoy's approach that history is often dictated by chance and not by any kind of intention. So what is my overall feeling? I think my expectations were extremely high in relation to this book. Was it a pleasure to read? Yes, definitely. Once I found my rhythm, it became this calm experience, almost a bit of a habit to be reaching for my War and Peace on regular basis. So I am a little bit sad to be parting with that. On the other hand, I am glad that I finished it. And I definitely have a huge appreciation for Tolstoy's ambition alone to cover such an enormous scope of characters and events and also ideas. That is truly extraordinary. However, overall, I think this book is not a 5-star for me, and this is my own personal opinion, purely on the basis that this book didn't quite grab me emotionally the way some other classics have. For example, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. To this day, since I read it early in the year, my heart is absolutely destroyed. That book devastated me. I was so emotionally invested into the lives of the main characters, and War and Peace didn't have that effect on me. And if anything, actually, War and Peace made me realize my own preferences. Because clearly for me, it's not really about the grand scope of the story. It's about caring deeply about the characters and being taken very, very far into their inner worlds. Now, having said all that, I think this novel deserves to continue to be thought about, and I shall be reflecting on it for days to come if I change my mind about anything or if I have any serious revelations about it. I shall keep you posted. Now, let's run quickly through various tips and tricks that I think will help you tremendously when approaching this book, which, let me be clear, it is definitely worth reading. First of all, I think what would help you is watching a video by Benjamin McAvoy, and I will link it below, on how to read War and Peace. He is not giving any spoilers there. He's not really talking about the plot. He's just giving you some historical context and a few pointers in terms of what to research before reading this book. They're very, very helpful, because otherwise you will be surprised why on earth these characters are speaking French. So it is very helpful to know ahead of reading this book facts such as that French was very widely spoken during that time and why. The second very important tip is do also research on translation, because they do very little bit. I wasn't personally too fast because I was more focused on the actual edition of the book, which I'll talk about in a minute. The reason why translation is important is because some of the translations are more modern, some of the translations are more traditional. Some of the translations, like mine, includes in the body of the text actual spoken French, and then you've got translation of it into English within the footnotes. Whereas I know there are also translations where the French is translated into the English right there directly on the pages of the book, and you may find that easier to read. The next thing is the edition of the book. I have Oxford World's Classics, which I absolutely loved. This is so comfortable to hold, to read. The letters are big, the margins are decent, and I would highly recommend it. I remember when I was comparing it to Penguin's edition, do, like I said, check which translation you want to go for first, and maybe then decide on the edition, because obviously translation will limit your options. But the Penguin version definitely wasn't opening flat like this one. It felt bulkier as well. I don't know why this one feels so comfortable. I don't know if it's because the paper is thinner or maybe the book is a little bit wider, but I highly recommend this, especially if you're planning on carrying the book with you. This is a great choice. I also have Oxford World's Classics as a hardback. This is definitely very heavy. Obviously, the letters are a little bit bigger. So for those of you struggling with your eyesight, then this may be a good option, but you'll only be able to read it at home because this is extremely heavy to carry. My next tip is, and this is very much something that I advise you do from the very start, is to create your own list of characters. I have done it and I would share it with you, except I realized as I continued to read this book that by doing that, I would probably give away some spoilers, because different characters get married to different characters. They also die or being born. So I think it's best if you do it yourself. Also, it would help you familiarize yourselves with the names and these characters. So literally what I did was, if I started reading a first page and you have a party at Anna Pavlovna's house, I would literally write down Anna Pavlovna, the aristocratic lady who is hosting a party, who is quite shrewd. Basically using my own words to describe what I remember reading about that character. And then you've got other characters and you've got their sons and daughters within that first scene. So then I would use arrows to kind of marry the two characters and describe to myself, this is Prince Vasily and this is his daughter, etc., etc. Trust me, this is going to help you later, because when you go into something like 50 or 60 pages and as new names are being introduced, you might get lost. I think after about 100, 150 pages, you will no longer have to do it, because you will get to know these characters enough and you will remember their names, and obviously same characters will start to reappear in the book. But I would highly, highly recommend doing that, even though it seems like a bit of a pain. Trust me, it will pay off in a big way, because it's going to save you from having to go back to the previous pages trying to find who was who, and therefore saving you loads and loads of time. And my final tip is, do, if you can, combine reading a paper copy with listening to an audiobook. Just because this will definitely make you feel less overwhelmed, and it will make you feel like you're progressing through the book much, much quicker. And the beautiful thing about switching to audiobook is that because this novel is divided into bite-sized chapters, you can always pick up where you have left it off. So basically, you just go to the end of the chapter while listening to an audiobook, and then when you're in bed, you can pick it up again, find the number of the chapter, and just keep reading. The only thing I'm going to say is, when you choose your audiobook, make sure it's the same version as your paper copy. It's not a huge deal because I didn't have that. So my version that I was reading was different to the one I was listening to, which was narrated by Thunderway Newton, and she did do a great job of it, I thought. But because there were two different versions, the numbering of the chapters wasn't quite aligned. So it took me an extra minute to find where I left it. But this is why I'm telling you this now, so you don't make the same mistake. Make sure that the audiobook you're listening to is exactly the same edition, because then it'll be easier for you to find the chapter. So that's it. I am overall very, very happy I've read this, and having now discovered the beautiful and astute way Tolstoy can write his characters, I am very excited about reading Anna Karenina, and my hopes for that book are even higher than for this one. So I am keeping my fingers crossed that it will meet my expectations. If you've read both, let me know which one you preferred. I would love to know. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I will see you next Friday, hopefully with a video that will be disclosing the best books I have read in 2025. I know most booktubers roll these videos out in December, but it is still December and I am in the middle of reading a book that I think is a huge contender to take one of the top spots on my list. So this is why I am holding off. And now I think I am going to watch the BBC's adaptation of War and Peace. Enjoy these last few days of 2025, and I will see you on January the 2nd, 2026.